They were once labeled as the noisy neighbors, a club in the shadow of giants. But today, Manchester City is a footballing empire, dominating English football and conquering Europe. In this video, we take you on a journey from humble beginnings to record-breaking success, from second division struggles to Premier League domination. This is the story of Manchester City Football Club. Make sure to like, subscribe, and let's dive in. Every giant has humble beginnings, and for Manchester City, the journey began in 1880, not as a football club, but as a social project. In the heart of industrial Manchester, in the area of West Gorton, a local church, St. Mark's, took a bold step. Led by churchwarden Anna Connell and two churchwardens, the initiative aimed to combat gang violence, poverty, and alcoholism by engaging young men in football. That small church team was known as St. Mark's, West Gorton. The club quickly grew in popularity, undergoing several name changes, from St. Mark's to Ardwick Association Football Club in 1887, and finally, in 1894, the name we know today was adopted, Manchester City Football Club. The reason for the change? The club wanted to represent the entire city, not just a local district. It was a bold statement of ambition, even back then. In 1899, City earned promotion to the First Division, the highest level of English football at the time. Their rise was steady and promising. And in 1904, the club made history. Manchester City won their first major trophy, the FA Cup, defeating Bolton Wanderers 1-0 at Crystal Palace. Billy Meredith, one of football's first real superstars, played a pivotal role. That same year, they finished second in the league, narrowly missing out on a league and cup double. But with early success came early scandal. In 1906, a financial irregularity scandal hit the club hard. 17 players were suspended by the FA for receiving illegal payments. Some of them, including Billy Meredith, moved across town to Manchester United, giving birth to an intense rivalry. Still, the club recovered and continued to attract large crowds. By the 1920s, Manchester City had become one of the best-supported teams in England, regularly drawing 30,000 to 40,000 fans to their home ground at Hyde Road. Unfortunately, in 1920, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the main stand of Hyde Road, destroying much of the stadium. This led to the club's move to a new ground, Main Road in Moss Side, in 1923. Nicknamed the Wembley of the North, Main Road would become home to City for the next 80 years. Though City didn't win silverware in the 1920s, they laid the foundation for the club's future. A strong fan base, a permanent stadium, and a growing football culture were all taking shape. By the time the 1930s arrived, Manchester City was ready for another push towards greatness. As the 1930s began, Manchester City was a club on the rise, and they didn't disappoint. In 1933, they reached the FA Cup final but were defeated by Everton. A year later, they returned to Wembley, this time beating Portsmouth 2-1 to lift the FA Cup for the second time in their history. That one brought joy to the blue side of Manchester, but even more was to come. In 1937, under manager Wilf Wild and powered by the goals of Peter Doherty and Eric Brook, City won the First Division title for the first time ever. They played an exciting, attacking brand of football and were lauded for their style, scoring over 100 goals in the season. Manchester City were now officially champions of England. But in typical City fashion, something that would become part of the club's reputation, the following season, they were relegated despite being the league's top scorers again. To this day, they remain the only English champions to be relegated the very next season. It was a bizarre and almost tragic twist in their otherwise successful period. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 paused football across Europe, and the post-war years brought new challenges. As Britain began to rebuild, so too did football clubs. For City, that meant bringing in new talent and rebuilding their identity. One of the most iconic figures of this period was Bert Trautmann, a former German paratrooper during World War II who signed for Manchester City in 1949. His signing sparked outrage due to his Nazi past, with thousands protesting. But Trautmann won over the fans with humility, loyalty, and brilliant performances between the posts. He would go on to become a City legend. His defining moment came in the 1956 FA Cup final. City were playing Birmingham City at Wembley. In the 75th minute, Trotman collided with a striker, injuring his neck, but he continued playing. Only days later, an X-ray revealed he had broken it in 5 places. Despite the pain, he helped City hold on to a 3-1 win and lift the FA Cup. That heroic act became one of the most iconic moments in English football history. Throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s, City continued to struggle for consistency. They were relegated again in 1963, spending a few seasons in the second division. But there were bright spots, including the signing of forward Colin Bell in 1966, a player who would soon become a club legend. As the 1960s came to a close, the pieces were beginning to fall into place for another golden era, but the period from 1930 to the mid-60s would always be remembered as one of highs and heartbreaks, glory and confusion. It was during this era that the unpredictable identity of Manchester City began to form, capable of brilliance, yet always on the edge of chaos. The late 1960s had ended on a high. Manchester City, under the management of Joe Mercer and Malcolm Allison, had built a squad full of flair, creativity, and steel. With players like Colin Bell, Francis Lee, and Mike Summerbee, City won the First Division title in 1968, the FA Cup in 1969, and the League Cup and European Cup Winners' Cup in 1970. It was a golden era, one that proved City could not only compete but dominate. But as the 1970s progressed, cracks began to appear. In 1972, Joe Mercer left the club after internal disagreements, and Malcolm Allison returned as manager, but this time without his old magic. He spent heavily on transfers, including big fees for players like Steve Daly, who at the time was Britain's most expensive signing. Unfortunately, many of these investments failed to deliver on the pitch. City's form dipped, and inconsistency became the norm. In 1976, there was a brief glimmer of hope. Under manager Tony Book, City lifted the League Cup, defeating Newcastle United at Wembley. It was a proud moment, but one that would stand out as a rare bright spot in an increasingly dark decade. The 1980s marked the beginning of a real decline. Constant managerial changes, poor decisions at the boardroom level, and a lack of stability plagued the club. They were relegated in 1983, promoted in 1985, and relegated again in 1987, a cycle of ups and downs that left fans frustrated and disillusioned. At a time when English football was evolving, Manchester City was falling behind. The club's traditional home, Main Road, once known as the Wembley of the North, started to look outdated. Meanwhile, across town, Manchester United were rising under Alex Ferguson. The gap between the two rivals was growing rapidly, not just in terms of silverware, but in vision and execution.